Welcome into Big Talk, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I'm Dalton Scheller alongside my partner, Sam Sprunger, ready to go for another episode. Sam, how we doing?
I know you produce too. You ever get you remember the Saturday Night Live skit where the wife and husband are playing at like whatever, a reunion or something. They go, "Ooh, hot mic, hot mic." That's exactly how I felt just a minute ago. I was like, "Oh, wow, that's a little hot in the ear." So I had to pull down the master volume in my old ear there. But yeah, I'm doing well. Obviously, I'm in a good mood.
Maybe it just means we're coming in hot because
that may be. We have such good stuff.
We're getting ready to launch what is going to be a bit of a different series throughout the summer where we take a look at all 18 Big Ten basketball teams for the upcoming season. And so it starts today. We're going to go in alphabetical order, which means we'll be starting with Illinois and Indiana for today, which actually is pretty nice because these are two pretty interesting teams when you evaluate the off seasons that they both had, and we start looking forward to the next season. But also there was some other news too. We could start here and dabble in these two areas first, Sam. One being the fact that Ohio State continues to have a wonderful offseason with its basketball program. Adding now to the coaching staff is Taylor Battle. He was recently coaching at Northwestern. Of course, he's Penn State's all-time leading scorer. He now goes to Ohio State, joins Jake Diebler's staff as an assistant, which seems like a great move for the Buckeyes.
It sure seems like it because, I mean, whenever you can get people with, he's Penn State's leading scorer. I mean, that means he knows how to get the ball to in the basket, as they like to say. I mean, obviously, or you don't score. But my point being is he knows how to get to that final. So he's going to teach those kids, those moves. To me, it seems like a pretty sound and good hire for Diebler. And you know what? He's impressing me more and more as an interim, now full-time head coach, that he kind of knows what in the world he's doing.
And besides,
seems like it. Let's say it that way.
And besides Battle's just great play from when he was in between the lines, I mean, given what he did at Northwestern as an assistant coach and being a family member of Boo Buie, you imagine that he had a lot to do with Boo Buie's wonderful career.
Yeah.
Really kind of sells the point of him as a coach, too. And then also in coaching news, you had Michigan State getting their next assistant coach, Sadie Washington, who had been at the University of Michigan for the past 8 years, joins the Michigan State staff. Of course, his father was the late, great Stan Washington, who was an all Big Ten performer for Michigan State way back when. But how about this full circle moment for the Washington family? And honestly, if you ask me, I think MSU got a pretty good one here with Sadie.
I thought you were going to say it all ended right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It always depends which frame you look through, but the frame I look through.
Well, it's kind of like me. We both graduated from the same high school, and our big rival in high school was Garrett. And I went there and coached for like 7 years. And I'll admit, the first year it burnt a little bit to put on it burnt, but then I got used to it, and now I own all sorts of Garrett stuff. So I totally get it. But I don't know what.
Go on.
I'm not forgiven. Is that what you just said? Good. Well, I guess see you next week, fellas. No, I don't know a ton about him as a coach, but for Tom Izzo to select him and make him an assistant coach means, Tom Izzo's won a couple of games in the past, so I think he knows what in the world he's doing. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And Sadie, of course, worked a lot with the post players at the University of Michigan. He did a great job on the recruiting trail. I mean, there's a lot he brought defensively to the plate with what Michigan was doing during the Beeline days and so on. So, no, there's a real pedigree there, and that's a big move for Michigan State. That's something to be pretty excited about. But something not Big Ten related that we were talking about before we actually started the program was the Dan Hurley news. That Dan Hurley may be leaving for the LA Lakers. Oh, you know what? You did find a connection. Look at that.
Look at that. Occasionally I can do something.
But Dan Hurley possibly to the Lakers. I mean, that's been the big fish in the news cycle for the past 24, 48 hours. This one's fascinating to me for a couple of reasons. One, and we'll get your take, Sam, but There's so many of these coaches that reach this level and they have such ambition where they want to test themselves at the highest level. That's one. That seems to be an ingredient that's in play here with the story. But also, when you take into effect Dan Hurley's coaching style and the amount of control he likes to have, the intensity he coaches with, it's hard to picture that on an NBA sideline. That doesn't seem like it would mesh very well. And that part leaves me really intrigued about this.
Yeah, and that's the thing about me, having seen him, I've only watched him coach one game ever, like full game, and that was the national championship game. And to me, the way he acts, I don't know that he could do that 82 games in the NBA and be effective at the same time. And, for me, he wants to control things. He wants to set things up. And he even made the comment when he was asked about going to the NBA. He said the right organization that really wants to win championships and instill a new type of environment. Well, you're dealing. I know he's a free agent right at this point, but LeBron James is not a young player. And it has been shown that he wants things to run through him while he on his in the organization he's with. So I don't know, unless him and Dan have a good conversation and they both feel good about where they can stand going forward, because maybe LeBron says, hey, I've only got a couple more years. Let me have some input at least and let me do my thing. You control the rest or whatever, but I know Dan's biggest thing, like he said his goal is to go to the NBA, and that was his all-time coaching goal was to go to the NBA. Yeah, great. He was won 2 national championships back to back, first since Duke or Florida. I mean, not Duke. Florida. But it's not that's not his pinnacle. He wants to go to the NBA. So if he goes to the NBA, you can't damn him for it because that's his goal. That's his life goal. And B, who are we to tell him he can't go? Like, tell him that's right. A poor move. That's him. He's allowed to make those decisions and find out later it was a bad move. If it is indeed, you never know. Maybe he walks into the NBA and just becomes the next Pat Riley.
Well, and so this is what I'm saying too, because I'm with you. Like it's you have to let the results come out before you make any judgments or evaluations or whatever. But it is fascinating nonetheless. If he does take an NBA job, that style, you don't see that in the NBA anymore. Nobody quite does that. Even the Miami Heat with Pat Riley is a great example. And Eric Spoelstra and the way they do it, it's still a little bit different than the way Dan Hurley does it. I would be fascinated just to see those styles clash and see maybe if it works, but we don't have many examples to lean on during this time anyway.
How funny would it be if he goes to LA and the Lakers draft Zach Edey?
You know what? Excellent work bringing us back to the Big Ten, Sam. And with that, let's go ahead and start our previews. As we said, we're going to be previewing 2 Big Ten basketball teams each show here throughout the offseason, and we're going to go alphabetical order. So that starts us with Illinois and Indiana, 2 of the more interesting teams when you look at what they've done over the offseason. Let's go ahead and start with Illinois since they are first alphabetically. This team is really interesting, and I don't mean to keep using the word interesting, but it's hard to come up with another word because I'm not sure yet if it's good or bad, and that's not damning necessarily the moves the Illini have made, but when you take into effect that Terrence Shannon Jr. is now gone, Coleman Hawkins is in the transfer portal, Luke Goody transferred to Indiana, which we'll be talking about later on, Dane Danger left. Like, there are a lot of pieces for Illinois to replace, and they started to do some of that. They brought in Kylan Boswell. They brought in some other talented players and really helped that backcourt out. And it's I suppose maybe the best way to put it is not only is it going to be a new look with the new key players being different, but it's going to be a new style. I think they're going to have to play faster. And without Terrence Shannon Jr., without Marcus Damask, without Coleman Hawkins, I'm curious to see where the Illini end up this year.
I think even though they've got so many, like they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coming in from the transfer portal, they've got some freshmen coming in. The news yesterday of Cannon Catchings being released from his national letter of intent at Purdue. Yep. I've heard some rumblings that maybe Illinois is potentially his next on his list. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate because I haven't heard other than just some rumblings, but to me, it still seems like they're a rebuild because of all that they are losing from last year's team. I mean, last year's team was a damn good team. They went to the Elite Eight. I mean,
first time since 2005.
So, I mean, they were an excellent team. But what they have coming back from that team is so little compared to what they had that you're just not sure what they're going to bring to the table. Now, it's not to say that they couldn't, these 5 transfers and the freshmen that are coming in don't do well and don't finish them in the top 3 or 4 in the conference, but there's so many question marks of how well they'll gel. Brad Underwood has had these problems before with teams recently, so you just aren't sure. Now, to say that they don't have anything, that would be a very inaccurate statement. They have some stuff in their cupboard and stuff that's coming in. They're not going to be a bad team. It's just how well are they going to be overall?
Yeah, and I mean, we brought up Kylan Boswell. Look, he was the starting point guard for Arizona this last year.
Right.
And he slides over to Illinois. That's a big get. Excuse me. Brad Underwood and the Illini get Kerry Booth, who transferred from Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. They get Trey White from Louisville. They get Jake Davis from Marquette. And then they have a very talented freshman coming in from Lithuania, I believe. And this guy is going to be a play now type guy. This is not a freshman that sits and waits.
Yeah.
I mean, he is a talented player. So KJ, I can't remember how to say his full name.
They also got a shooting forward from Evansville, Ben Humricius. I don't know how to say his last name. He's a 93 overall rated player in the transfer
prospect.
Portal.
Yeah. So you do have pieces, but again, when we're talking about replacing Terrence Shannon Jr., who was dynamite last year on the floor, I mean, he just was, especially in transition. Yeah. You can make the case he was the best fast break player in the country. Coleman Hawkins had a big year this last year. He's gone. Marcus Damask, that was your answer when you were stalled in the half court. Like, there were
especially when Shannon was out for his time. Damask was the one that kept him afloat for a good portion of that time.
So what's kind of funny when you look at Illinois is, I mean, we talk about some of those great players. None of them really were point guards by any means. They didn't really have a point guard. And now this year's team is going to have a couple of point guards, and they're going to have to kind of work it from the reverse angle of how do they set up the offense? How do they set up the team with a couple of ball dominant type players and Boswell and KJ? And I think that part will be fascinating to see what Brad Underwood does. I don't think there's necessarily a hurdle that I wouldn't have confidence that Brad can figure out, given what he's done retooling a roster every single offseason. So I'm not shy on confidence, but when you stack it against the rest of the Big Ten, I'm curious to see maybe how far they can climb with this roster.
Yeah, and I the only reason why there's any trepidation with me whatsoever is that 2 years ago during the Big Ten tournament, Brad was still saying, "Yeah, I'm just hoping we gel." They had just been eliminated from the Big Ten tournament, and he was saying that he hoped they gel. And then last year they gelled. The additions he had, they gelled just fine, and they had one heck of a good season. So to me, I see it as kind of a crapshoot. We're at a 50-50. It could be either side of the coin right now because of all the rotation that they've got and new players coming in.
So I'm with you. I look at it as pretty high risk, pretty high reward for the Illini. I'm curious too when we start stacking it up against the rest of the Big Ten, because without getting into some of the previews of some of the other teams, when you look at the top of the conference, of course, I think a lot of people would have Purdue up in the conversation. I think a lot of people will have Indiana in that conversation, which we'll be talking about here in a moment. I think UCLA's in the conversation.
Yep.
I think you could start to flirt with the ideas of maybe Ohio State. You can flirt with the idea of maybe even Michigan. Michigan's going to be an interesting one to talk about later on.
I don't doubt that one, really. I don't. I really like Dusty May, for one thing. I like him as a coach, and I wouldn't be shocked. So he's going to be – they're going to be an interesting preview.
I think Oregon's up around there. Rutgers is probably hanging around there with the freshmen that they have coming in. Again, we'll talk about these teams later on. But where do you see Illinois kind of in that fray?
Well, we kind of flirted with, talking about our top, player or teams. And we both mentioned Illinois coming into this, that, a couple of weeks ago when we kind of just made it a quick little topic that we talked about. I think they're top 5. I really do. I think they've got enough in there, and I'd be able to fine tune it once we get closer to the start of the season. But I think right now with what they've got, and who's to say Hawkins doesn't decide he's coming back to Illinois? Has he officially decided absolutely no way he's coming back to Illinois, or is it?
I thought that was the case.
I know he's tweeted out some stuff, or formerly known as tweeted out some stuff saying that he would be going somewhere else, but he hasn't been committed, or he hasn't committed anywhere. So I would think that anything's possible. But I'm not going to say that he is coming back or that there's a really good chance. But I would say top 5 with what they've got. And the coach is the big thing with Rutgers. That's a different story. Or with Michigan, I would still say, okay, new coach, got to work it in, got to figure that out, and maybe that's a thing. But Illinois got one of the better coaches in the conference, period. I mean, there's not a debate on that. He's Brad Underwood's top 3 coaches, top 4 coaches in the conference. So I think Illinois is in a good shape to where they're top 5 at least.
And look, I mean, especially in today's day and age, you can win ball games with a great scoring guard. And sure. Kylan Boswell, I think, can be that. I think KJ, to a certain degree, can be that. But, I mean, we've already seen a taste of it with Boswell at Arizona this past year. I'll have to pull up his stats. But my point just being, especially when we get into March, oftentimes we talk about you have to have a great scoring guard to win games and go far.
Yep.
And I think Boswell can maybe be that guy. And what we've learned from Brad Underwood is he'll allow those players to work with the freedom they need, the leash they need to be able to succeed at that level. So Kylan Boswell last year, if you take a look at his numbers, Boswell finished averaging 10 points a game last year. He had 133 assists for the season, so about 4 assists a game, 2.5 rebounds a game. He was shooting at about 40% from the floor, 38% from deep. So you give him a little bit more room to work, and I think Boswell can achieve even more.
Well, and look at him as what a point guard does. He can score when he needs to, but he can also just distribute. He doesn't have to be a scoring leader in order to be effective. I mean, you go to where I like to all the time. Braden Smith, there were times he'd dump 25 in and lead or be one of the leading scorers, or there'd be times he'd have 9 points, but he'd have 12 assists. So you don't have to be the leading scorer to be in a really, really good point guard in basketball. Period.
And not to mention, Illinois does get to keep a player that I think is pretty useful. Ty Rogers. We saw him last year average over 6 points a game, over 5 boards a game. Just a big body guard-like player. Real physical. He's a matchup issue for a lot of teams. So you keep that tool in the toolbox for Brad Underwood, and you start working with these other pieces. And I'm kind of with you. I think Illinois can reach maybe as high as top 5 in the Big Ten Conference, which is really a perplexing conference this year, too. As we go through the previews, I think everybody will kind of understand a little bit more why. But do you have anything else on Illinois before we switch to Indiana?
I like orange.
Indiana. But let's go ahead and move over to the Hoosiers, because some people right now like Indiana maybe as the favorite to win the Big Ten this year. And
Pump the brakes.
I was going to say, I can already feel what Sam's saying, because Sam, of course, if you're new to the program, has an allegiance with the Purdue Boilermakers. But it is also something we've heard before, Indiana being the favorite heading into the season, and it doesn't quite pan out that way. But this one is really fascinating for a couple of reasons. It feels like Mike Woodson did the different thing from the trend that he had set in the past, where he came off as a very old school type coach. We're going to develop guys. And then this year he said, you know what, we do need to go get players. Like, I could see there are flaws with our roster. We go get players. And now there was a bit of a talent accumulation this offseason. How do some of these pieces fit? We could talk about that in a moment. But just the idea that Mike Woodson and Indiana almost seem to be turning a page into, okay, we need to have some of the better Jimmies and Joes. It's not so much about the X's and O's.
I'm going to say something, and people are going to take this as me just being a Purdue fan. It seems to me, because you just mentioned that it seemed like he was going old school when he first got there, and we're going to develop players. Now, all of a sudden, he jumps in 2 feet, feet first into that portal, and 5 of the 6 additions they have coming in are all portal players, right?
Yep.
So it seems to me, after the last 2 years, and all of a sudden IU fans were yelling, fire Mike Woodson, that he's trying to save his job is what he's doing. I don't know that for sure. It just seems, it comes off as maybe he's like, oh, we need to go get more Jimmies and Joes, the better Jimmies and Joes, so we can try to compete. That way we can get these guys off my back.
I was going to say, and maybe, I mean, what you're laying out may not be wrong, but it also could be the possibility of Mike looks around and says, this just isn't enough. Like, not so much about job security, but just says, we're clearly not at the level that we need to be at.
And that might be it. Just and like I said, I know that's going to come off as me just being a Purdue fan trying to take a jab at IU. It really, though, sort of sent to me going from one extreme to another, where they weren't, his first couple of years, they weren't adding transfers. Now, granted, the portal wasn't as big at that point.
Correct.
It's ballooned hugely, but it was still there.
Yep.
Excuse me. To where, they were getting 5-star recruits, and those weren't panning out. And now all of a sudden, okay, for the past 2 years, they've been calling for me to get fired. Let's just go add whoever we can add in, and just throw everybody good that we can get onto this roster and see if we can't see it. I don't know. And you're right. He may be just coming around to times, maybe, but not everybody's doing it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. They've got a stacked roster. They do.
Well, and so let's start talking about this a little bit, because they bring back Mackenzie Mbako. They bring back Malik Renew. I mean, those are 2 very talented interior players, and that's the starting spot really with them. Galloway returns for Indiana, but then you start looking at those additions. We talked about with Illinois a minute ago. Luke Goody transfers from Illinois back to his home state of Indiana, coming out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. So he goes back, and that helps in the regards that the Hoosiers, for as long as I can really remember, for the last decade, haven't really had a shooter that, like, There've maybe been a couple in there. Was it Devontae Green that I'm thinking of? He had a nice role as a shooter, but my point is, look how bare this cabinet is when we're talking about just shooters at Indiana. Luke Goody comes in. He's going to be able to provide some 3-point shooting from the wing. They go and get the big man Umar Ballo from Arizona. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting too, because now you have Mbako, Renew, and Ballo all on the inside. Where do some of the minutes go? How do they play together? Are there enough balls for all of them? Like, there's a lot of questions in how that all fits, but it's certainly a lot of talent there. But then you take a look at the backcourt too, because they also added in Carlisle from Stanford, blanking on his first name at the moment, but also, and Miles Rice from Washington State. And Miles Rice, I think he's going to be one of the starting guards in the backcourt. Look, he averaged 15 points a game last year at Washington State, and they need some good guard play. Like, there's no buts about it. Like for Indiana, Renew's good, Mbako's good, Ballo's going to be good, but without good guard play, all of it's going to suffer anyways because the ball's not getting to them in the right spots.
Well, Goody's good too.
Sitting on that one, huh?
Yeah, you're right. But I will refer back to my trepidation to Illinois. How quickly do these guys gel with one another? And in the post, how do you run a rotation with three big guys? Do you run two at a time? Is there ever a point where I would hate to think, is there ever a point that all three of them are on the floor? I doubt, about 98% doubt that. Yep. But my point being is how do you get that rotation to where all three of them are happy and all three of them are being as productive as they possibly can? So this is a test for Mike Woodson this year. I think this is his test year. This is his fourth year. I truly think that, coaches should always get at least 4 years because that gives them the chance to get their entire roster as their own, minus maybe a couple of, fifth year seniors or whatever. Right. But my point being is the whole roster is theirs. This is his his make or break season in the aspect of he needs to win, and he probably needs to go relatively far in the maybe second weekend, maybe even to like Elite Eight type, or IU fans are going to be calling for him again. And this year they might have a reason with the stacked roster that they've got.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the fascinating parts about this too, right? Is there's always so much pressure at Indiana. Look.
Oh, for sure.
Was Tom Crean the greatest coach of all time? No. But did he win 2 Big Ten titles while he was at Indiana and he was fired 2 years after his most recent Big Ten championship in 2016? Yes. Like there is pressure and stakes with Indiana. You really thought Archie Miller was going to be able to rise to the level. I thought that was a home run hire when it happened. Now, obviously, we're 4 years into the Mike Woodson era, as you talk about, or beginning the fourth year. And I think you laid it out perfect. For Indiana, with this talent accumulation, there's an opportunity there. How does Mike Woodson figure out to play those three big players together in Ballo, Mbako, and Renew? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to it. It's hard to even theorize what exactly a rotation may look like. But if he finds the way to get that to gel, we are talking about a Big Ten title contender in Indiana. Sure. Like if he can figure that out, I don't know what that answer is, but if he can figure that out and Indiana is able to play those three big guys and get the most out of them, we're talking about a team that legit could win the conference.
Let's talk about my confidence with that, though. And the taking my allegiance to Purdue, I don't know that I'm that confident that Mike Woodson can figure that out.
And what's that based on?
In the past 3 years, he's had the roster to where, or at least, I'm sorry, the first 2 years. Last year was kind of one of those amalgams where he had some players, but it wasn't a great roster.
Yeah.
But those first 2 years, he was expected to do something. Yes, he took them to the tournament. Yes, he kind of got screwed with the play-in game and then having to fly to the West Coast to play on the first day of the tournament. I understand that part of it, but at the same time, he just didn't seem like he was developing those kids as what he was expected to. So is he going to figure this fourth year out? I don't know.
Well, and to kind of the point of grading Mike Woodson on the early part of his tenure, I think the biggest knock that you could take to Mike in that early part is you had Trace Jackson Davis, and he did develop Trace Jackson Davis. Sure. Trace had a wonderful career, but there didn't seem like there was help around Trace Jackson Davis the way it was needed. And that could be you could point to a myriad of different reasons for it, but that feels maybe like the missed opportunity. Like anytime you get one of those greats and you're not winning the conference title, like let's use Purdue as an example. When, like if they didn't win when Carson Edwards was there, you'd kind of scratch your head and say, what did we do wrong? Right. And the team with Jaden Ivey and them didn't win, right?
They didn't win the Big Ten championship. They got beat by Wisconsin because of,
That's right. The Chucky Hepburn bank-in shot. That's right. That
killed their chance at any share of the title because of that, but. Not making excuses. They should have won other games. So
my point is, I think that's a note that a lot of fans of different teams and programs can all relate to. There's a team where maybe you had a star player, you had a great nucleus, and for whatever reason you didn't achieve the ultimate goal. Like you were kind of put in position to, or had an inside lane to maybe get, and you kind of scratch your head and wonder why. Well, with the Trace Jackson Davis thing, I think that's a little bit of what we carry too when we talk about Mike Woodson in this early part of his tenure.
And I'm not saying that he can't develop at all. So the fact that he was able to help or, develop Trace Jackson Davis, he did a good job with him. He just didn't hit, you've got more than one player on your team. And yes, basketball is one of those games where you can have one player kind of transcend and bring the team up. But if you don't have your role players developing at some rate, you can only go so far. And I think that's why IU ended up, making it into the second round and falling short, or, for whatever. So that to me is a little bit of a, like, if you have Trace Jackson Davis, great player, absolutely great player. You had some other pieces that if they developed at any sort of a measurable route from where they started to where they ended in the season, you should maybe be getting to that Sweet 16. You should maybe be sneaking into an Elite 8 or something.
And I think maybe that's the biggest thing too, when we go back to the point of Indiana just hasn't had shooters for years at this point. I mean, Trace Jackson Davis is a great example. Every time he touched the ball, he was getting extra attention. A lot of times it was double teams. And without shooters on the floor, other teams were able to guard Trace Jackson Davis with two, and they didn't have to suffer any consequences. Now, whether you want to point that to Mike Woodson for accountability or fault, or you want to put it on Archie Miller beforehand, there clearly was roster construction flaws. And here in the fourth year, it feels like they finally started to make a couple of steps into building a roster that was more well-rounded by throwing in Luke Goody from Illinois, by going out and grabbing Rice and Kyle from Stanford.
Cannon Carlisle.
Carlisle, thank you. But it feels like they started to address some of those needs. But overall, that's been the big thing. If they're able to step up, I really think this could be Indiana's league. But that, to your point, that's a tough formula to figure out that they're going to have with Ballo and Mbako and Renew.
And is it too little too late? Like, if they don't gel and they miss the tournament or have an early exit in that tournament, will they be calling for Woodson to be fired? And this is the year that you're kind of like, well, we don't have an excuse now, and I'm not saying that I'm rooting for that, because I have said it multiple times. When IU is good, it's good for college basketball. I am a Purdue fan saying that because it is absolutely true. When IU is good, it's good for college basketball. It's definitely good for the Big Ten. It makes them more viable as well. And so to have one of those blue bloods, those traditional blue bloods, actually performing at a very high level brings some validity to your conference, and also brings validity to the sport. And so I'm not rooting for them to fail. I just from what I've seen the last 3 years, if they don't gel, is it too little too late? Like, yes, they've addressed what they've needed the past 3 years in year 4, but if it doesn't come to fruition in year 4, does he get a year 5?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a larger and more expanding talking point throughout the season if things aren't quite going so well with Indiana. So honestly, out of all the teams this offseason, if we were ranking not maybe the best, but the most interesting or fascinating, I think Indiana might take number 1 for me on the list out of the entire Big Ten Conference, just because I'm not sure how Ballo, Mbako, and Renew fit. And if they do, that's going to be fun to watch. But I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly what that rotation is. I also don't get paid the big bucks to
glad
figure
I
that
don't
out.
have to figure it out.
Yeah. But I if it works, I would love to see it. I think from a basketball standpoint, that would be so much fun to see. So I think they're just about the most interesting team. Maybe you can throw Michigan right there, Ohio State a little bit there.
That's my list right there, is IU, Michigan, Ohio State. Those are my 3 as interest.
It's going to be fun to watch. And to your point, there's a bubbling storyline. No matter how this goes in Bloomington, it's going to be a big year for Hoosier fans nonetheless.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we get you out of here, do you have anything else on any of the teams? Or are you good?
I still like orange.
All right, Sam, go ahead and take us home. Let everybody know where they can find us.
Hey, still haven't added the TikToks on there, but on the TikToks, Instagrams, and the platform formerly known as Twitter, we are at B1G_talk. That's B1G Dalton, not BIG. Hold the one up there for me. There you go. Yes, one number. Yes, B1G_talk at Big Talk. Then on Facebook, it's B1G Talk Big Talk. Not all Big Talk. Again, those I'm sure are fine people. We just don't. They're not us. Check us out on the ASAP Network every week. Streamed every week on the ASAP Network. The podcast version later that day through Lounge Media Group. And if you want to watch the stream and you missed it the first time, you can go to Spotify, check us out there, and find out what we our facial expressions. I guess I don't know. Whatever.
Why wouldn't you want to see it?
Well, yeah. I mean, come on. Why not?
All right. Well, that'll do it for another episode of Big Talk, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. For myself, Dalton Shetler, that's my partner, Sam Sprunger. Thank you all so much for tuning in and joining us. And everybody have a great weekend, will you?
See ya.